All right, back on the drive. I'm in the car again. Thought it'd be time to do another one of these daily drive episodes, and this time I want to discuss a concept. I believe this was pitched by somebody on the Discord. I don't remember who it was specifically, but if you pitched this idea, thank you for the idea. It's kind of it's one of those ideas that the first time I read it, I was like, huh, do I have anything to say about that? But now that I think about it, I think that there's probably some things we could say about it. Here's the premise. What if the bombs never dropped? What if 2077 rolls around in the Fallout universe and the bombs don't drop? And we can get into the discussion about why that might be, but I think what's more interesting is the situation and how it would unfurl. So we'll get into that in a minute, but here, let's just consider what do we know about the bombs, and what do we know about the bombs dropping, and who did it and all of that. Well, there's still a lot of speculation around this. There's a few different things that we do know. We do know that in the TV show, which is canon according to Bethesda, that the Vault Tech, at least some of the Vault Tech people up top, were considering dropping the bombs or getting the war started, but we don't know if that actually happened. And I've discussed this before on a few different episodes, but one of the predominant concepts around why we don't know if this happened is, first of all, we don't see them actually pull the trigger. Secondly, the what was her name on the show? The woman who was the ghoul's wife, who was clearly probably one of the top members of the Vault-Tec Corporation. And she mentions that they were considering doing this. The corporations that she was talking to seemed like they were interested in this idea about the vaults and how to get more people into vaults. But when it all came down to it, the bombs dropped at a time when her daughter was not with her. And so that creates complications around seeing them as the ones who actually did it. Now, was it China? I mean, that's the other option. Was it China? And I've talked about these things. I'm not going to go into this in great detail. But Tim Kaine, on his little video blogs he does on YouTube, said that was originally the concept, was that it was China. Like it kind of pointed to it. People speculated that might be it. And in fact, China is the one who was responsible for the bombs dropping. Now, is that canon? We don't really know. They may have went ahead and dropped the bombs, or maybe something else happened. And of course, I've speculated other crazy ideas like it was aliens or something like that. There's always the possibility that it was the US government who initiated this, or the Enclave, or heck, even some sort of, I don't know, message sent by United States military forces that basically said, you better surrender, China, or we're going to blow you up or something. And then they took that as, oh, they're sending the bombs now. And so they retaliated. And so you've got this confusion around who actually dropped the bombs first, because there were threats and things like that. You could even write that in, right? A certain vagueness around, well, if the US was threatening to drop the bombs, do they mean that they were actually going to? And therefore China responded. You can get into all that stuff. That's neither here nor there, because in this version of the world, the bombs don't drop. There are no bombs going off in the United States. There are no bombs going off in China or any other place in the world in 2077. And for this premise, let's just continue with the idea that the bombs never drop. It's not like this got delayed a year or 10 years or something like that. The bombs never actually go off. What would happen next? Well, I think the next most logical step in that thought process is, well, what happens with the conflict between the United States and China? At that point in history, they are the only two predominant nations left on the planet who have the capacity to provide for their people, to have methods of energy, and are actually expanding their borders, taking over other countries, things like that. So my sense of it is that war would still happen, you would still end up with more continued conflicts between the United States and China. It just may not turn nuclear. So situations like we saw in Alaska could happen again. In fact, we could have a revisit to that situation where after some time, the Chinese pull back their forces, they come up with some new plan, and they attack back in Alaska again. That could happen. It could be that the United States is actually making some headway over in China on the mainland. We don't really know. We know that they landed troops. We know that there's probably even some power armor over there, and there are forces engaging in places in China. So maybe the conflict focuses primarily on that front, and the Chinese don't ever really push back into the United States. And due to overwhelming technology and superior tactics, or who knows, I mean, you could write all sorts of things into this. The United States slowly whittles away China's ability to push back in that conflict. And so we never really get war on American soil after that point. At least not any like major conflicts. And over time, the Chinese become more and more desperate. And so they attempt more and more desperate tactics. They go even more guerrilla, more covert, and where they can't push back from a forces perspective on battle lines, they instead push back in other ways, which is true to the case. As we know that they have stealth technology, that they've infiltrated certain sections of the United States and the United States government and those kinds of things. So my sense of it is that as the Americans push into China and continue to take more land and continue to hinder their war effort by bombing, not with nukes, but regular explosives and rockets and things dropped by planes and stuff like that, but bombing manufacturing locations and military bases and slowly encroach in on the Chinese, that at the same time, the Chinese would be encroaching more and more on a kind of a war of disinformation and espionage on US soil. So there's not outright combat that's happening so much as kind of like what we're going through now. You're going to end up with automated bots. And I'm not talking robots that are walking around. I'm talking like digital software bots, AI, that are pitching communist propaganda or twisting and leveraging, just like we're seeing today, the perspectives of people by fear mongering, by pushing the things that will create perspectives in the United States that fracture our society even more, that divide us politically and take advantage of people in desperate situations who are having a hard time making ends meet, because there's going to be a lot of those. You have to remember, even if the United States is winning on the Chinese front, in the case of sending a bunch of soldiers and things onto the Asian continent, doesn't mean that the home front is going to do well. Resources are dwindling. Humans are having a harder and more difficult time as corporatism, I should call it. And this is something I've learned over some time. It's not necessarily that capitalism is the bad guy in Fallout, and Tim Kaine addresses this as well. It has to do more with human beings and the way that they give into their vices, I guess is a way you could call it. And corporatism and the extremes of corporatism are making it harder and harder and harder for the working people to actually get ahead, to have a home, to have food on their table, any of those kinds of things. So that becomes more and more difficult. People become more and more desperate. Americans specifically become more and more desperate. And so they become more and more open to propaganda and messaging that leverages the kinds of things they're going through, their lack of ability to take care of their families, their lack of ability to get ahead in a career, to actually make a living, to feel like the world is worth fighting for anymore. And the messaging will leverage that against Americans in order to fearmonger and build conflict and division. And I think what you will see is as the United States pushes in on China and continues to take more of their land, the Chinese will push in on the Americans in that sort of way. And in both cases, those cultures will crumble. So even if the bombs didn't drop and we don't have a wasteland in the United States, I would predict that we also would not end up with a democracy. We would have a situation where the United States is so fractured politically and people are so desperate for help and for a way to survive, all of these things. And we've seen this historically happen with, for example, Julius Caesar in ancient Rome was leveraging these kinds of things in order to build support for himself. And they're not exactly the same things, but similar kinds of things. People being desperate, people feeling like they need a strong leader to step in and make all the wrongs right again. We saw this in Hitler's Germany. And this is something that we have seen echo throughout history, and it works because when people get desperate, they want any answer. When people are afraid for their safety, for their futures, for all of those things, they are much more malleable and willing to give up freedoms in order to get the thing that they think they want. And so as China falls apart because the United States is bombing them to hell or taking over their land, the United States will fall apart as well. And that will create a situation that will turn the United States fascist, at least in this version that I'm concocting in my head. And we know how that works. Fascism requires the specific obedience of a dictator type leader who is promising to his populace that he will make everything right. And the only way that somebody in that position maintains power is also by fear-mongering and division. At first, the division will be, we will lock up all the commies, we will push back against these people, and we will find foreigners in our own country. We will find every communist who is working to destroy America, and we will at first we'll start kicking them out, but no, eventually we will lock them up, and then we will kill them in mass, just like what happened in World War II. And then when those people are all locked up and wrapped up, guess what? The fascist dictator has to find a new boogeyman. They have to come up with another reason why everything sucks, because they don't actually have any solution to the problem. The problem is so vast and so difficult to solve. And oftentimes the fascist dictator is not somebody who's good at solving problems. They're somebody who's good at leveraging their charisma or whatever in order to affect the population and maintain power. And so because they are not solving the problem, prices will continue to skyrocket, resources will continue to dwindle, and the populace will continue to be upset. And so that leader will then, and it creates this cycle, have to come up with another excuse for why that is. Well, we rounded up all the Chinese, and clearly that wasn't enough, and so there must be other Chinese sympathizers still in our ranks, or anybody who looks like they're from China is going to be round up because clearly they're the problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any problems anymore. This is the kind of rhetoric that is used by these types of individuals. And once those people are round up, then all of a sudden it will be somebody else. In Hitler's Germany, it was things like the Jews and the Romani people. But you're going to find that it will expand out from that. And it might expand out in really ridiculous sorts of ways. It's these people who are highly educated. It's the scientists. We need to round up all the scientists. They're the ones who are the communists. Or it's these other groups of people who are minorities. And usually it does spread to minorities because they have less ability to actually leverage any political power. And they're easy to pick on because they are minorities. Or maybe it's oftentimes there's a religious stint to this as well. The problem is that everybody's so sinful in some sort of way, And so therefore, that's why the world is going to hell. And so we need to round up anybody who disagrees with this religious view. There are lots of different ways that they can leverage these kinds of things. And the whole point is to just keep alienating some group in order to maintain power. But eventually, you whittle the groups down to the point where you've gotten rid of pretty much anybody who would dissent, anybody who would be, I guess, the boogeyman, and you run out of boogeymen. And on top of it, now you've spent who knows how long, 10, 20 years, however long this can go on, but you haven't solved any problems. You're still out of resources. You still can't actually help your populace. Everyone is still continuing to struggle. And on top of that, where you could have gotten help from external sources, other countries, other nations found solutions. The scientists who would have been the ones who might have solved the problem, you've already rounded up and thrown away into a camp somewhere or murdered. And so you never actually solve the problem. And in this scenario, even though the bombs don't drop, the world still falls apart. I think if you actually look at all the details, all the background that we were given about everything that was going on in the United States, in the world of Fallout, in the years before the bombs dropped, you can see that the world has been headed to decline and conflict for so long that it's almost impossible to turn that back around. Heck, even the diseases that happen, you could blame the scientists or the doctors for not containing those diseases. And who knows if another disease gets out. It's time for that spring reset. I'm taking a look at everything in my closet and figuring out that, oh no, this absolutely needs to go. And it's about time I replace things so that my clothes aren't older than my 15-year-old. Now you might think that they lasted that long because they were well made, but no, they're in terrible condition. Unlike the new jeans I just got from Quince. Jeans have always been my personal go-to because you can kind of wear them for lots of different things, but maybe they're not your thing. Maybe you're looking for, 100% European linen with insanely soft flow knit activewear fabric. It's definitely getting warmer, and their flow knit activewear is moisture wicking, anti-odor, and soft enough that you'll actually want to wear it every day. So pick out what you want. You can't go wrong because they have prices 50 to 60% less than similar brands. And like I said before, they are high quality. I continue to wear their clothes all the time, and I know that these new jeans are going to last me a lot better than the other things in my wardrobe. And on top of it, they look great. They're so comfortable. And I spent just as much on the jeans that I am now cleaning out of my wardrobe. So if you're looking for something better, just all around better, go check out Quince. So go do it right now. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/falloutlore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. Go to quince.com/falloutlore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/falloutlore. Once there's no more boogeyman, then there's not really a solution, at least a solution to keep you in power. And so once the populace who is still around has realized that they've been hoodwinked, that people have been lying to them and their lives never got better, there will be rebellion. There will be a civil war. There will be conflict, and the United States will fall apart. And ultimately, in situations, if you look at nature, if you have a demographic, or I don't know if demographic's the right word, but if you have a population of a certain type of animal that lives in a certain type of biome, and you change that biome enough to reduce the food, you reduce the resources in that biome, the population of that specific creature will reduce to match the amount of resources in that biome. You see this in human populations as we've continued over time to improve our ability to farm and produce food and crops and things like that. The human population has grown in lockstep with that. It's very well documented, and you can see, I think there's 2 or 3 major locations in the historical time frame where the population jumped considerably, and that corresponds with changes in technology or culture around how you produce food. It's the same exact sort of thing. So in, let's say, 2087, 2097, when the world has been through all of this terribleness, the population will have to reduce to the point where people can sustain themselves. And when that happens, you will have the downfall, you'll have this political conflict, but you also have the downfall of corporations and the infrastructure that is needed, or that was there and readily available for millions and millions and millions of people, will not be able to be kept up anymore. You'll end up with smaller pockets of people in very specific locations, many of whom live in rural locations because they will need to make their own food. The one benefit of the situation is that the whole world doesn't get irradiated. You don't end up with a nuclear winter. You don't end up with radiation and the mutations that follow with that. And so there's still a chance for that reduced population to kind of spring back. But the other side of this, when it comes to resources, isn't just food, it's energy. And at this point in the future, we've used up most of the oil and the coal, these burnable resources that you dig out of the ground, and the population is without those things, then what will the population leverage in order to create energy, in order to automate their crops and their fields, in order to power the robots that are still around that might do some of the work for them? Where do they get that energy from? Well, if they're smart and they still have the know how to do it, it would make sense to do it through things like solar power and renewable resources, water power, things like this. But if that population is still so, I guess, brainwashed against those kinds of things, because that's communist or whatever, then they will probably continue leveraging nuclear power. And if they continue to do that, then there is still potential for radiation and fallout from those kinds of things. You have nuclear factories or nuclear power stations and things like that that are probably built and have to power the world and parts of these communities and things like that. So does that bode well for the future? Maybe short term. I mean, maybe they can still find ways to get rid of the stuff, the radiation and the what's it called, the stuff that the nuclear power centers put out that has to get buried, the irradiated waste. Maybe they'll still be able to handle that stuff. I'm not sure how that part goes. But I think overall you end up with a world that goes from a population of many billions of people. I think in the population episode I did, it was like 9 billion is where it starts to top out. 10 billion maybe. I think you go from a world of about 10 billion people and it drops precipitously due to lack of resources, conflict, and all of these things. And maybe you end up with a world that goes back to 1 billion people. Maybe the United States, instead of being probably at that point pushing 400 million people, is reduced to 40 million people. And they're spread out across the country. And I think what you end up getting is kind of a second dark age, a world where the populations are now more spread apart and infrastructure is harder to maintain. Kind of like when Rome pulled out of many locations in Northern Europe, the people who were left had to maintain the roads and the aqueducts and the temples and or whatever else was there that they wanted to maintain, but they didn't have the infrastructure still from the Roman government. So that meant that over time, a lot of those resources or a lot of those structures kind of fell into disrepair because the cultures moved on. And after several generations, some of them didn't even remember how to repair or handle those things. Some of them did. Some of them were in continual use over time. You can't just black and white say that somebody's going to write and go, well, actually, the Dark Ages weren't so dark. Yeah, I know, but they still were in many ways a decline from the previous civilization and a major shift and change to those cultures. And that's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is some of that infrastructure will fall apart, and some of the environments that these people are living in will be very different. Now, there's one other question you could ask. If the Enclave was designing the vaults in order to try to get to the point where they could plan leaving the planet and moving on somewhere else, would they still follow through with that? And what would the vaults be used for? And I think the vaults would still be used for scientific experimentation. I think there will still be people in the government who are interested in that information. And as the world suffers and kind of falls apart, some of those vaults would still be used. And a lot of people probably get lied to in order to get tested on, or maybe just, hey, here's a place to live and some food. Come be part of our experiment because you're so desperate. That could happen as well. And in that situation, I think you still end up with people who try to leave the planet. Uh, I think you still, and this is the other piece, is that in order for in order for Earth to turn into a wasteland, it doesn't have to be nuked for that to happen. We just have to have destroyed the environment enough through carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and burning all the fossil fuels and things like that to create something where the temperatures are so extreme that it makes it hard for people to live in certain types of locations. And although war and a lack of certain types of resources are also going to reduce the population, I think that's going to be another one of the big pieces of this, is that you end up with a world where the deserts are bigger and the ice caps are melting and the coastlines have flooded the majority of cities because most cities are on coasts. And so you end up with a population that just has to kind of move inland and figure out how to survive and build new infrastructure and move on. And I guess you could, as a writer in this scenario, come up with reasons why fallouty types of stuff can still happen. Things like AI running amok, but even more importantly, mutations and things like that. You could say that the scientists who do survive continue tests on subjects against their will or whatever, and now you have super soldiers, or the attempt for super soldiers still because of the conflict of the war that was happening, and maybe some of them get out. And so now you have super mutants who live in certain locations and are a problem, or death claws, or irradiated animals, or crops and animals that have been mutated as a way to try to make more food, but that goes awry. And so you end up with very large animals that end up aggressive rather than docile, like giant angry cows or something, like pigs or something like that. I mean, that could be a part of it as well. There's a lot of ways that the world can still go in a terrible direction and everything still feels very Fallout, even if the bombs don't drop. I guess the last thing to consider that crosses my mind when thinking about all of this is, what if things actually work out? What if the United States and China call a ceasefire? What if they take a look at the state of the world and both of their leaders are intelligent and caring enough that they shake hands and they say, we're all going to suffer and die together, or we have to work together in order to try to save the planet? Can they do that? Has it gone too far? By 2077, has it gone too far? Now, imagine conflict stops. Imagine all the money and all the focus on militarization goes away. All the disinformation campaigns and espionage stops happening. The culture is no longer being divided through these means to try to maintain power. Democracy in the United States prevails, and we elect people who actually have solutions. Is there enough time to save the planet? Maybe. Maybe. Global warming will probably still be happening, and so that'll be something they have to fight. And they have to find ways to create food and to deal with people who are losing their homes along coastlines and things like that. There will be a lot of problems to solve. But human beings, when united for a specific cause, can often do incredible things. And that would be an interesting story to tell as well. I have to wonder, though, is it possible? And so that's my perspective on what if the bombs never dropped. And I'm sure it's just one perspective. You could take this in so many different directions. And my perspective is very clearly through my lens, through my understanding of the way humanity and history has worked, and still trying to tie it into the tone and the kind of the mood of Fallout. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts. Chime in on the Discord, or chime in on the Patreon, and let me know what you think. Thanks for being here for this week's daily drive. I'll try to keep doing these when I get the opportunity to. And thanks for being here, for your support. I'll be back with another regular episode in probably just a few days. I'll see you later.